think little Albert ever was able to have a dog or get over this condition of fear? Yeah, so again, a lot of this historical psychological research happened before we really had good ethical sort of practices in place and oversight by things like IRB and all that stuff we talked about at the very beginning of the course. So probably wouldn't be done today. Don't want to do some kind of conditioned fear response in a child that may be hard to uncondition or produce extinction of that. But some of the major points from Watson, and I will point out that particularly in this section, there's a lot of sort of names of people that you should know and know what they did, right? So Pavlov, classical conditioning, you should pair those things together, all right? Watson with stimulus generalization, right? He was the one that really showed, okay, if I condition a fear to this rat, what other things are going to also take on that property of being afraid of it? Anything that has fur, right? Anything that sort of resembles that. And he argued, going back to sort of applying these different learning models to language, that language was imitated and that there was a lot of stimulus generalization. And if you think about the clip where Dr. Pilley talked about teaching Chaser his dog words, said that there was a point at which there was this insight, and all of a sudden Chaser learned, oh, this is the thing, I got to associate that sound, that word, with this object, right? And so then it becomes, that's when we kind of talk about stimulus generalization, right? And in learning language, we talked about that there's sort of a period right after the initial vocabulary starts forming, that there's rapid expansion of vocabulary. And again, I think that's the stimulus generalization that's happening. All right, evaluative conditioning. Evaluative conditioning is when you get a change in your liking of something, and that can be an increase or a decrease in liking based on if it's paired with a positive or negative stimulus, right? A form of classical conditioning. But this is now changing the way we evaluate something. That's why it's called evaluative. Changing the way we evaluate something. Why would you care about this? Does this affect your lives? Yes. Okay, kind of do a teaching good and bad behaviors. I'm going to tell you that this is affecting your life many, many times every day. Anyone think of an example of pairing something positive or negative stimulus to try and change the way you evaluate that? This, yeah. Okay, yeah, that's the noise when you don't put on your seatbelt is a negative stimulus that hopefully motivates you to do that, right? But this is, yeah.
I'm sorry, I was at my school.
Go for it.
Like doing homework or
Okay. Yeah. Guys are thinking outside my box today. But advertisements do this all the time. This is the main point of advertisements. The next time you're watching a TV show, don't fast forward through the advertisements and look at them. How many times are the people in the advertisements having fun? Right? Doing something really positive. It's upbeat. The whole thing is, hey, look at our product. Look at our product and like it because you feel good watching this commercial. Right? And in fact, research has been done. Researchers paired people reading humorous cartoons and non-humorous cartoons. So what would the difference be? So the same thing, okay, again, having careful control, same image, a toothbrush and a roll of toilet paper. In the humorous one, the toothbrush says, sometimes I feel I have the worst job in the world. And the toilet paper says, yeah, right. And then in the non-humorous one, the toothbrush says, I wonder what day it is today. You happen to know? And the toilet paper says it's Friday. Right? Not very humorous. Right? So they were reading these, and while they were reading these cartoon pages, they gave them one of two's energy drinks. And when the energy drink was paired with humor, later on, they chose that energy drink over the one that was paired with the non-humor more. And it wasn't just that they liked this one better when they paired the other one with humor and didn't pair that one with humor. They saw the effect. So it always influenced, whether or not they were reading the humorous cartoons, influenced their later selection of this. And all of that is subconscious, right? You're not thinking, oh, I'm choosing this because it was what I drank when I was laughing at those funny cartoons, right? All of this is happening subconsciously. So, and so that's the point of good advertisements, if they're doing their job, are evaluative conditioning, right? All right, that brings us to operant conditioning and B.F. Skinner, okay? Again, another name that you should know, B.F. Skinner. And so B.F. Skinner developed the principles of, developed the principles of consequences driving our own behavior. So here, one's own voluntary behavior, what you do, the consequence of your behavior is going to influence whether or not that behavior happens again in the future. And so he really defined how reinforcement and punishment can influence future behavior. That was his area of expertise. And he did a lot of work with rats pushing levers, working for food. He did a lot of work with pigeons, pecking, a lot of animal work. So in classical conditioning, right, the light comes on, a food pellet appears, the rat associates the light with the food pellet. Every time the food pellet comes on, that's going to signal, hey, I should go get that. In operant conditioning, it's the rat's behavior that's going to cause the food pellet to appear. The rat has to push the lever a certain number of times, and once they push the lever a certain number of times, then they get rewarded. And that reinforces the rat pushing that lever more. So, and here's Skinner at his own failure quote. Going back to our fire scene quote. He said, failure is not always a mistake. It may simply be the best one can do under the circumstances. The real mistake is to stop trying. So very much kind of in the same attitude as fire scenes. So maybe it's on failure. All right, so how does this operant conditioning work? How do we get a rat to do complex behavior? Most animal training uses these principles of operant conditioning. So here we're going to see a clip of someone trying to train their pet rat to go ring this bell. And a couple of points I want to make about this for you to pay attention to. So here, as the rat does behaviors approximating, getting closer to ringing the bell, it's going to get reinforced. But if you were going to reinforce it with to give it a pellet, that would be sort of distracting. The animal needs to know, hey, what I just did is what's getting reinforced. So they have a little clicker. So when the rat, in the first scene, starts to approach the bell, they're going to do the clicker, and that's a signal to the rat, hey, I did something good, I can go get a food pellet. And then they're going to go back and they're going to approach again and get closer and get rewarded. So watch how this training happens in order to teach a rat how to ring a bell. So that's the clicker. So now, rat gets closer. All right, it pays attention to what that is, gets rewarded. Now it's going to make it harder. You got to pay attention and touch it. So it's learning, hey, this is the thing that rewards it. So you touched it, got rewarded. He started to jiggle it, it's rewarded. So now he's going to quit rewarding him for just touching it, and he has to actually shake it to get rewarded. See, on that last trial, the rat went up and like shook it a little bit, but didn't really like ring it, and he didn't get rewarded. And so it's like, wait a minute, I didn't hear the clicker. So then he shakes it vigorously, gets rewarded, right? This is how we shape behaviors, right? And we can shape these behaviors to become some really complex things. And in fact, there was an interim many years ago now. That was all about learning and adaptive behavior. And as part of that interim, the students taught rats how to play basketball. And then they had a basketball tournament.
Here live here at Wofford College, Spartanburg, South Carolina, we're going to go Peter. I'm here with Peter. Couldn't ask for a better day here, Kenny. What's your predictions for today? I don't know, there's a lot of talent with the rats down here. Really good pick one, but we're going to wait and see, and the outcome is going to be unpredictable. So. The objective here in rat basketball is to gain a better understanding of how to shape the rats or shape the subjects to during a certain behavior. Once they get the ball into the basket, they'll get a reward in here, and that'll be their reward to reinforce the score.
All right, so a couple of things I want to point out about this. Every student had their own rat to train how to do this. And again, same sort of thing. Rat picks up the ball, gets rewarded. Picks up the ball and goes towards the basket, gets rewarded. Puts it in the basket, gets rewarded. Finally, the last behavior, the final behavior is you only get rewarded if you go find the ball, take it down, put it in the basket, then you can get rewarded. Right? When they were training these rats, they had like half cages. So that this, let's say, I don't know which side these animals were trained in, but let's say this animal was trained for this basket. So we want to put it in their own basket. If they're going to play basketball, it doesn't count if he puts it in the other guy's basket, right? And so what they did was the rats learned, right, that the reinforcement is to the right side or to the left side of the basket. And so it matters like where that reinforcement is. And so they know when they were practicing, anytime I went down here and put it in this one and went to that one, I wouldn't get rewarded. It always had to be, I put it in this one and I go to my right. Does that make sense? So it gets pretty complex in the sorts of things that we're teaching these animals to do.
And so there's no clock, and just the first 11 and 7-0 to scum. So Kenny, will you please do the honors Tip off, about to begin. 3, 2, 1. Let's play rat basketball. All right, Steve Nash has the ball. What do you do with it? He's got good handling skills. Could it be? We got a little crowd noise up in here. That's not really crazy. Let's go. Let's go. Yeah. Here we go. And it's in. 3, 2, 1. Let's play. Yeah. The Bears competitors 5-0 against Clutch. Goes to the 6th goal. That's 6-0. Away from Scum.
So they did a whole bracket and determined like who the winner was. And so it mattered like how well the students trained their animals. Some of them you see are better at this than others.
It's quite the game. 9-4. I've never seen a match like this in my life. I am really speechless right now.
And of course, attention to the ball is 9-5 now. 10-5. And Nolan needs one more point. Ladies and gentlemen, 100 feet. Here she goes. And there we go. Now you want a championship, what do you want to do?
Keep playing.
All right, I'll be at Disney World, but
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It's been a really good experience. It's a really neat way to learn about soccer.
There. All right. So in opera conditioning, reinforcement is always going to increase the frequency of that behavior, right? So giving the rat a food pellet when it's hungry is going to reinforce doing putting the basketball in the loop, right? So the rat chooses the left path, finds some Fruit Loops. The next time the rat gets to that decision point, it's more likely to go to the left. The opposite of reinforcement is punishment, right? So now the rat chooses the left path, but gets a shock, an aversive stimulus. So in the future, the rat's going to be less likely to choose that path. And in fact, we can talk about reinforcement and punishment in two different ways. So these examples here are examples of what we would say is positive reinforcement and positive punishment. So positive reinforcement adds a pleasant thing, right? You get a reward for doing that. Positive punishment adds an unpleasant event, right? The rat gets shocked. We also have negative reinforcement. So negative reinforcement will remove an unpleasant event. Right? So, who can think of an example of negative reinforcement? Yeah.
Grounded.
What?
Grounded for the child.
Grounding?
Like you can't go to the hospital.
No, that's adding, right? There we're adding something. We're not removing a negative thing, right? We need to remove a negative thing.
Like taking away the food when you do something bad.
No, that's still not, that's a pleasant thing, right? So think about our, yes, Mason.
Like not doing the dishes.
As a reward?
Yeah.
Yes. So, okay, you don't like doing the dishes, so you do your homework and you don't have to do the dishes tonight, right? That is a negative reinforcement. Doing the dishes is an unpleasant thing because you did your homework, you don't have to do that. Do you see how that would promote behavior? That would increase the probability of that, right? You know, with the rat, we can have a very loud, annoying sound, and if the rat pushes the lever, the sound goes away, right? Taking away an unpleasant thing. Negative punishment is removal of a pleasant event, okay? That's the getting grounded. You can't go to the basketball game. You can't do something you want to do. Sit in time. And that should decrease the probability. Okay, we good on this? All right, so real quick, in your notes, you don't have to turn this in. If you want your child to make their bed each morning, write down an example of each of those. What is an example of positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment that you can use to increase the frequency of negative energy? What would be the behavior we would want to decrease the probability of? Not making their bed, right? So these would be if they didn't make their bed, what happens? These would be if they did make their bed. now? Still working on it? Take a few minutes and make sure you have one of each of those four. Yes? A type of things. So you're adding an unpleasant event, right?
They have to do the task like making event, but they don't do it, they get like a timeout.
Timeout would be removing a pleasant, well, if they thought it was pleasant. You could, like physical hitting, like spanking, things like that, that would be a form of positive punishment. You could think of non-physical things as well. So the key is, what is an unpleasant, the addition of an unpleasant event because you didn't do the behavior. We want to decrease not making the event and increase making it. All right, who wants to share? Share one of theirs. We'll start with the easy one. What does someone tell me their positive reinforcement? Yes, Carol.
For positive reinforcement, they said they get indicates correctness every time they do that.
Okay, so adding a pleasant event. Great. Somebody tell me a negative reinforcement, removal of an unpleasant event. Yes, Karen. Okay, so you make your bed, you don't have to clean the dishes. Who had something different? This is why you write it down, so you can just read what you wrote down. It's okay. If it's not right, we'll all learn something. Yes, Anna. Okay, if you make your bed, you don't have to take out the trash, right? Good. What about positive punishment? If you don't make your bed, who had something for that? Yes, Cooper.
No TV time.
No TV time. All right, so no TV time, where it's positive. TV time is a positive, a pleasant event, right? So you're not adding something unpleasant. Let's say hate to watch TV. Right?
The addition of a chore.
Addition of a chore, sure. Could be if your bed's not made, then you do have to take out the trash. All right? Anyone have something else? These are the ones that are more difficult. Yes? Don't make your bed, you can put a timeout. Given that timeout is an unpleasant event, timeout's kind of unusual because it kind of works both ways, right? So timeout can be, instead of being able to do whatever it is, you gotta go sit in the corner. So there you're kind of removing a pleasant thing. But if sitting in the corner is not a pleasant, is considered unpleasant, then you're also kind of doing this at the same time, right? Who has another example of negative punishment? Not making it bad. These are probably the harder ones to think of. Yes, Susan. You can't play video games. Yeah. Enjoy playing video games. If you don't make your bed, no video games today. Okay. Anyone else have something? Yes, Scott.
You don't eat dessert.
Don't get dessert after dinner, right? All these are good, right? So do you see how this can motivate behavior? Right, and help shape behavior. All right, so I know that this is punishment. So your book talks about this, right? And it turns out, positive punishment can be a motivator, but it's better to think, it's healthier to not think about adding a negative physical event to somebody, but thinking about, okay, if you don't do this chore, then you have more chores that you're gonna have to do, right? So that's a much healthier thing than spanking, for instance. And so corporal punishment or physical punishment is correlated with aggressive behavior. And there's been a lot of studies in children. There's been a lot of studies that have looked at this, And this is, again, as we get into these complex human behaviors, like aggression and physical punishment, we can't do causative experiments, right? All we can do is look at, in homes where there was a lot of this, what is the temperament of the children? In homes where there was none of this, what is the temperament of the children? Can we correlate? Can we find associations? And it turns out that this is a pretty significant correlation. Now, there's a lot of messiness in that, because highly aggressive children, they solicit more spankings, right? And then the spankings then, or aggressive parental temperament, may then cause this to become worse. And so it becomes sort of this cycle where children being aggressive get spanking in some ways, it doesn't reinforce it, but it becomes a belief system for that child, right? And so there's other research that suggests that how, and we'll talk about this more on Monday as we finish up development, but how you were raised as a child greatly influences how you will raise your own children. And everybody says, I'm going to be different than my parents, I'm not going to turn to my parents. Spoiler alert, you do become your parents. You have to actively overcome this, because this becomes a mindset of what you experienced in childhood is the way that parenting should happen. Right? All right, so we'll come back to more about parenting. We'll talk more about attachment and those things on Monday. So let's finish up learning here in language. All right, so how you're reinforced matters. So we have 4 different ways to influence your behavior: positive and negative reinforcement, and positive and negative punishment. Right? But how you get reinforced, particularly the positive reinforcement when I'm giving you something good, how I give that to you strongly influences that behavior. So there are 2 different ways we can do that. Every time you do the behavior, we'll stay with the making the bed, right? So every time the child makes a bed, I give them a reward. Right? That's continuous. Or I could say, hey, you got to make your bed, and if you make your bed, some of the time I'll give you a reward. Right? Which one do you think is stronger? Continuous? You think partial?
Because they want to anticipate when they're getting that reward. So if they do it every day, they're going to get that reward.
Yeah, so if we think about, if we're trying to, what's the goal of doing this? To teach them to make their bed every day, right? If it's continuous and they make their bed one day and we don't reward them, what are they likely to do the next day? Not make their bed, so like I didn't get my reward yesterday. Every day I get my reward. But if it's partial, right? And particularly if it's unpredictable, the real thing about this is that this is highly predictable. I'm going to know if I don't get my reward, and then that's going to influence me not wanting to continue doing that. Or if it's unpredictable. If I don't know which day I make my bed, I get my reward, but I'm not going to get a reward if I don't make my bed. But I know some of the time when I make my bed, I get a reward, then that becomes a stronger thing, because you're going to make your bed not necessarily anticipating that you're going to get that. All right, so there are 4 schedules of reinforcement. There's interval versus ratio. And so interval is based on some amount of time passing that you get reinforced. And ratio is based on some amount of behavior being performed. And I'll give you some examples of each of these. The other 2 schedules are fixed versus variable. Fixed meaning that the reinforcement is delivered on a constant amount of time or behavior. So we can have fixed interval or fixed ratio, or we can have variable interval and variable ratio. So this is the sort of continuous versus partial. It varies around some average. predictable, unpredictable, right? So fixed is predictable, variable is unpredictable. All right, so if we look at the ratio ones, so ratio is based on behavior, right? If it's fixed, right, every 3 times you make your bed, you'll get rewarded, and you know that. The behavior tends to sort of plateau. So I make my bed 3 times, I get rewarded, and then I take the next day or 2 off from making my bed, and then I get motivated. I say, okay, I'm going to make my bed 3 more times because I want that reward. So you learn what you have to do to get the reward, but you're not always motivated to do that. Does that make sense? Whereas when it's variable, we're back to this, I don't know, today might be the day. I make my bed and I get my reward. Or maybe not. Maybe I have to do it 3 more times, but I don't know because it's variable. And that drives a high steady rate of behavior, right? Without these gaps, these pauses. And it tends to have the slowest rate of extinction. So I could go for a long period of time here without getting a reward and not stop doing the behavior because I know, hey, maybe it's been a while. This next time I make my bed, I'm going to get that reward, right? So it's harder to extinguish this since it's unpredictable, right? Predictable versus unpredictable. And that would be, this variable ratio reinforcement would be the strongest schedule of reinforcement to motivate behavior. Anyone think of an example of this? Of the variable ratio reinforcement? Can you think of places where this happens? It's probably a good thing that you don't know about this, but this is the primary model that casinos use. So most all gambling is you keep doing your behavior. You keep doing the behavior, putting the quarters in and pushing the button. And every once in a while you're going to get a reward. But you don't know when that is. It might be the next time, it might be 100 times from now. Right? And I mean you can have things where you just the thought that I might get rewarded motivates behavior even though I never get rewarded. What would be an example of that? There are millions of people doing this today. Buying Powerball tickets, right? What is your chance of ever being reinforced? But there's that one big reinforcer out there that motivates people to do this behavior, right? So again, strong motivator of behavior. All right. And I'll just say, casinos want to pay out some, but they want to pay out way less than they're bringing in. But when that payout happens, they want it to influence everybody that can hear and see and be within that vicinity, not just the one person that actually got the reward, which is why it makes a lot of noise, there's lights that go off. It's like, hey, there's a winner right here. And so that actually is somewhat rewarding to the other people playing, even though they didn't get the reward. It's like, oh, this can't happen, right? Let's just have to keep doing this. All right. Whoops. On intervals, instead of being behavior, so ratio is behavior, intervals is times, different time periods, right? And so here we would say every Tuesday you're going to get rewarded if you make your bed. Okay, what's going to happen on those on Tuesdays? They're going to make the bed, right? What's going to happen on Wednesday? Not make the bed. Probably not make the bed for quite a while, and maybe they just make the bed, they're like, I should make it a couple of times before Tuesday so I can get my reward. So they tend to have this, closer to the time when the reward is going to happen, there's more behavior, and then immediately afterwards it plateaus. Again, here, we're just saying, I'm just going to randomly reward you. You have to make your bed and get the reward. reward, but you never know what that is going to be, right? And so that is a stronger motivator, but not as strong as having it linked to the actual behavior. Linking the reinforcement to doing the behavior is stronger than linking it to some time interval that varies. Does that make sense? All of this stuff, all of these principles, this is what B.F. Skinner figured out and told everyone how all this works. So this is a nice sort of summary, right? Talking about, here's an example of cleaning this room, right? So you should be able to apply this stuff, all of these learning methods. We're thinking about how does this apply to language, right? And so the correcting of a child as they're learning language, they point to a cat and say dog, you're like, no, it's not a dog, right? That's not rewarding them. Or then they point to the cat and they say cat, and you're like, yes. So that praise is positive reinforcement. A lot of opera conditioning in language learning. Okay, observational learning. So this is Bandura, write that name down. Bandura observational learning. So in operant conditioning, this is really important. The difference between these is in operant conditioning, the person learns from their own behavior. They learn from the consequences of their own behavior. In observational, we can learn from the consequences of someone else's behavior. So I'm a parent, I'm working really hard on my son to get him to make his bed, and his younger daughter, we haven't started that yet because she's younger, but she's watching him get rewarded for making his bed, and she starts making her bed. Right? That's observational. She's learning from him getting rewarded, not her getting rewarded. This is also part of sort of imitating behavior, but you're imitating the behavior because of the consequences that that behavior is having with someone else. It can be influenced by the presence of a role model. So why would I imitate that behavior, or why would I value that person's consequences? Because I have some relationship with them. Right? It could be something as simple as imitating sticking out your tongue, right? So here's a monkey that can be taught to do this. And there's actually neurons in your brain that we call mirror neurons that respond when you see someone else doing a behavior. And those mirror neurons also respond if you do that behavior. So if I stick my tongue out, those neurons respond. But if I see someone stick their tongue out, those same neurons respond. It's like watching a mirror is what we call mirror neurons. All right, so Bandura had this famous study called the Boa doll study. and then they're put in a room with the dog. And obviously they did controls where they didn't show the video and just put children in the room with the dog and observe their sort of natural, unguided behaviors. And it was less. Can they pick up the hammer and perform the same thing as the adult did?
Exposure to aggressive language increased the fraction of guns, even though it was a lot. Guns had less to do with the gun who had no exposure to aggressive language.
So, the adult didn't use a gun, but there was a gun in the room, and so this again, generalization. So this is generalization. So a lot of things are happening at the same time, right? But observational learning, and so why do we care about this? Well, there's been a lot of research. Again, it's hard to do causative research, although some studies have tried to control for this. But a lot of correlational research has found that exposure to violence, particularly in childhood, increases aggression, increases violence. And so why are we concerned about this? Well, what did children spend a lot of time doing? They spend a lot of time watching TV. And so there's been, this research has helped tone down violence, particularly in shows that children might watch or the times children might be watching, right, to try and not reinforce this. Video games also, research that shows. All right, so in our last 5 minutes, what I'd like you to do is to jot down examples of each of these. I'm not going to take this up, but this is what you need to be doing to prepare for your exam next Wednesday. You need to be thinking about these big concepts that we're talking about. How can I apply? How can I apply? Right. So in terms of what we've talked about, language acquisition, how do each of these different types of learning contribute to language?